an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 1, Episode 10, Homecoming. In this episode, Penny gets stuck in the Neitherlands, which is a place between places, and the only way for him to get out is to rely on Alice and Quentin for help. The help that they can provide depends on them having great sex, which unfortunately is gonna be a problem. Poor Quentin. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thanks, first of all, to Nicole for commissioning this episode. I have a lot of feelings about this episode. First of all, meeting Alice's parents really, opened my eyes a little bit to what's going on there. I don't know how many of you have had friends with parents like this who are really, really open sexually, but her being a little bit of a prude now, and I say a little bit because really she's not, it's just, she has some self-consciousness, but it's not like she's never kissed anybody or had sex or anything like that. But I was with somebody for a little while who had parents kind of like this. They weren't, having sex parties or doing anything that was quite as overt, but they were much more open than most parents. And the guy did have some issues surrounding sex because of it, because he just sort of wound up going in the opposite direction. And the fact that they were so pushy for him to share and be honest with them about everything in his life made him close up. And it was part of what ended our relationship. So that right there, this whole subplot really felt unfortunately, too familiar. And then the other thing that I really enjoyed this episode was the whole concept of the Neitherlands. Now, I don't know how many people watching this or listening to this show have ever read all of the C.S. Lewis books, because obviously the whole thing is meant to be a sort of is allegory the right word when it's not really it is, I guess, allegory for the Narnia books. And the first book, not the first book that he wrote, but the first book temporally in the series is called The Magician's Nephew, and they wind up somewhere called The Wood Between the Worlds. And it is a forest filled with pools of water that are just in there. It's like a flat turf of grass, trees growing between. And as far as the eye can see, different pools of water. And there is no identifying mark to any of them. Unlike the Neitherlands, in which it's fountains, but they do look different. You can tell if you're at the one you're meant to be at or not. The Wood Between the Worlds, you can't tell. And the only way that they manage to remember which pool is the one to go back to their own world is by cutting a strip of turf out of the ground next to it to mark it. And otherwise, if you walked away without marking it, you could spend the rest of your life jumping into pools into the wrong world, trying to get back to your own and not succeeding. So it's a pretty similar idea, this whole fountains that lead to different worlds and whatnot. And I like the fact that the idea of the wood between the worlds is something that they almost forget to mark it and walk away. And they get really shook when they realize what they almost did. That they almost left themselves like locked out of their world for God knows how long. And I like that what the show did, or what this writer did, is expand on that idea a little bit and be like, okay, so what if they didn't mark it? And what if there were people actively trying to keep them from finding it again? And this is a really interesting premise that I would like a little bit more information, because we have Penny meeting up with this woman who's like a librarian type. And I'm still not really, we're not, I don't think, meant to really know what exactly was going on. But it's obvious that she has encountered Penny before. And she describes to him the circumstances for these like roving bandits, basically, existing. And I feel like I would like to hear more of that story, because something feels fishy there to me. But we'll get there. Okay. So let's start off with Penny, who comes up through the fountain, and he is, Penny, honestly, dude, it's your own fucking fault. Like, I get really irritated with the fact that he is so, he's so arrogant. Jesse's here. Hi, Jesse. He's so arrogant. He's so disdainful. And yet, if he fucking paid attention and listened to anything, maybe he wouldn't wind up in these goddamn situations. It's really hard for me to have very much sympathy for him when there are multiple people around him all the time willing to talk to him and help him, and he just refuses to fucking hear it. And so anyway, he's getting out of this pool after touching the button, which he apparently like took with him, because we saw it in the case and then gone from the case once he was disappeared. And in Magician's Nephew, they travel via rings, so it's not totally dissimilar. And he comes out of this fountain, and he's sopping wet as he crawls out of it. But as soon as he is standing outside of it, his clothing dries completely, and he's a little bit, like, baffled by that. Now, guys, I know that I make fun of Penny's outfits plenty, but I'm gonna do it so much harder right now, because what is this motherfucker wearing, and has he been wearing this for the whole previous episode, and I just didn't notice? I guess I was distracted by children ghosts, but for fuck's sake, guys, he is wearing this fucking patterned hipster shirt, literally unbuttoned to his navel. And it feels like he purposely bought a shirt that's a little bit too, tight for him, so that when it's unbuttoned, it doesn't just sort of flop open. It is pulled open. And he has his necklace on with whatever the fuck is on that as a pendant. And then this, long, slouchy sort of blazer jacket thing. And he just fucking looks so ridiculous. I'm sorry. I can't with this outfit. Like, it's too pretentious. It's too hilarious. And there is no way that a dude that takes himself as seriously as Penny does has a leg to stand on when he dresses like that. I'm sorry, Penny, but no. I would just never stop making fun of him. If I were Quentin, that would be my angle, is constantly making fun of what he fucking wears, because Quentin obviously is always at a disadvantage whenever he interacts with this guy who says something every time Quentin mentions anything about Fillory or, his knowledge of these books or anything. There's always some joke about how, you will never be a man. Oh, this is why you don't have any dates, or, whatever. Quentin, you got hella ammunition sitting right in front of you in the form of Penny's wardrobe. Make use of it, my friend. Jesse says, Penny dresses like Steven Tyler's microphone. I don't know what that means, Jesse. His microphone. It's so... I'm just looking at it. So anyway, the color of the landscape in this is really pale and washed out. There's a faint greenness to like the grass and trees, and a little bit to Penny's jacket. But for the most part, everything is really gray and misty and sort of washed out. So he comes upon a girl named Eve. And I really like the way this works, because Eve nails that sort of middle ground between, I find you a little bit threatening, and, but you seem nice. I did not think that Penny should hand over the button, because I just think that's a terrible idea in general. But I did low-key understand why he didn't feel like he had anything to worry about. So, because she was, like, there are moments, I think, that give away that she's no good because of the way that she suddenly focuses in and is like, can I see it? With this fucking, like, intensity that's just, ooh, okay. But she's good at being super relaxed and, like, low-key friendly in this way that I think, you know, it just, she did well. She played this well. The script is written well, so that you're not really quite sure. And the fact that she winds up not being friendly, while not a total surprise, you are kind of like, ah, shit, I almost liked you, you know? So he asks her if she lives here, and she says, yep, born and raised. And her outfit, for what it's worth, is rad. She's got this weird sort of, like, I don't know if it's like a weapon strap or something that has a ton of beading and, like, metalwork on it that's really pretty and looks almost like a piece of jewelry. And this really, like, wide, slouchy sort of hoodie underneath a jacket that's, it's just, this whole look is really cool looking and manages to look both sort of magical but also kind of modern, in a way that is kind of difficult to pin down, you know, but I really liked it. And she explains to him that he's in the Neitherlands and that he's in between places, and she wants to know which fountain he came out of. And she says, you know, people from Earth always have the most interesting magic. And she says, tell me what brought you here. And he sort of, like, backs away from her because he's getting the sense that there's something to worry about. But she's continuing to be so friendly and sort of just blowing right past his apparent discomfort here. And is saying, like, oh, you know, sometimes it's enchanted capes or rings. This one guy rode a sled pulled by flying, what do you call them? Not zebra, reindeer. And he's like, Santa Claus? And I think, honestly, more than anything, as much as Penny would never admit this, I think her claiming that she met Santa Claus is what made him decide to trust her. Like, I really do think that's what did it. But she says, yeah, you know him? He's a really nice guy, right? And he says, no, I didn't have anything like that. Just a button. And she says, that's new. Can I see it? And really just barely manages to keep it under wraps that she's, like, wanting this thing really bad. Just barely. He pulls it out and shows it to her, but he doesn't hand it to her. He just shows it to her, and she grabs his arm and tries to take it. And it becomes clear very quickly that this shit that he is in he is not ready for. She has 3 people that, like, come running down to help her, and he immediately transports himself somewhere else. But he does not manage to transport himself back home. He is at a different fountain where there is some sort of, like, Egyptian god. I'm not sure if this is I can't remember the name of it, the dog-headed god, the one that guards the underworld. But yeah, he winds up there and is like, motherfucker, because clearly he intended to get back to Earth and Earth's fountain. But when he goes and stands up on the edge of because they're all sort of at the bottom of this sort of stadium seating, like, I'm trying to think of the way there's like a series of steps that go down to each pool. So he stands on, like, the top step and looks out, and all he can see in every direction are more and more walls for different pools, like he realizes very quickly. He is not going to be able to get out of here as easily as he thought. And we find out that he is using his ability to travel the way that he does on Earth, and that doesn't really work here because of the directionality and there being, like, I think he says there's more than one moon and things like that. All of it sort of throws off his ability to tell where he is. So he draws a circle on the ground in the gravel and sits down in it in order to try and contact Quentin, because Quentin has the most open mind and is the most easy to get to. Which leads to the worst thing in the whole world. Guys. I wasn't ready for this at all. I really wasn't. I had no idea what was going on for a second. It took me so long. First, we have Alice walking up to him, and her hair is down and like curled, and she's wearing this fucking really familiar looking white crepe gown. And she's speaking some other language that for many of us is also probably familiar. And then in comes Julia, and she's dressed like Slave Leia and is telling him that she needs help. I need your help to fix the hyperdrive and get a message to my friends. And then Alice walks up to her and says, I can help you if you help me find my dragons. And that's when I was like, oh no. And then they just start making out. Guys, I just can't. Because then, to top off this incredibly dorky fucking... This isn't just nerdy. This is fucking dorky fantasy. Quentin walks in dressed like Indiana Jones. Because of course. Of course. I hate him so much. And he's saying to the two of them as they're making out with each other, I respect the shit out of both of you. And you are leaders and you're people. And I'm feminist. Quentin, stop it. Okay, buddy? And this whole thing. They even in his dream, they don't want anything to do with him. I guess he's just going to sit there and watch, even in his own dream, because they both seem uninterested in him being there. And Penny is standing there and he is cackling. And Quentin says, why do you ruin everything in my life? Now, my question here, I'm assuming that this, I'm talking about as I was watching it. At this moment, I couldn't help but wonder if this was an active fantasy that Quentin was having as he jerked off, and that Penny came into his head, unfortunately, during those moments. But it turns out to be a legit dream, which the fact that his brain puts dreams that specific together are just... Guys, I have never had that kind of dream in my entire life, ever. It doesn't happen. The closest that I ever got to something approaching that was so set in the real world. It was I think I had a dream that I was at a con and met some actor. It wasn't even that I was in the world, So in some ways, I'm jealous of the fact that he can have dreams like this and I can't, because it just doesn't really work out for me. Even in my dreams, I have too much anxiety. I spent all of last night dreaming that I was meant to go to a party and wear this specific dress, and I couldn't find it. And the entire dream was me tearing through my closet trying to find it, and then deciding on a dress that I thought would be as good. Then thinking that I found the dress I needed. Then it turned out it didn't fit. Then having, that was the whole dream all night. Was me just trying to find this thing, and I couldn't find it. It was excruciating. So, Maybe I just have sour grapes. But anyway, Penny says, I really want to make fun of you, but as far as I can tell, you might be actually some kind of savant. So maybe I'm just going to leave it and we will just talk about. And he's telling this to Alice, and she's like, who was I making out with? And she wants to know who, of course. And he says it was Julia. And she's like, oh, your lifelong crush. Cool. And he really tries, Quentin really tries to just be like, look, I, got a crush on her the way that you do when you're as young as we were when we were hanging out. And she didn't feel the same way. And I moved on and got over it. And now I'm with you. And it's nothing. Just don't worry about it. And the thing is, like, I don't know. I would be interested to know if Alice has any idea exactly what went down between him and Julia to cause Julia to come at him with that spell that made him think that he was in a mental hospital. Because I don't want Alice to, like, lose her relationship with Quentin simply because it makes her happy and I like Alice and I would like her to be happy. I say I like Alice. I like Alice probably the best of most people on this show, but I don't really like anybody. However, I do think Alice deserves to know that Quentin is the kind of person that would blame Julia for not being in love with him, and that would basically say, I refuse to help you with trying to get back into break bills because you refused to be in a relationship with me. I think Alice deserves to know that's the kind of guy that she's dating. And I would also really like to know that fucking Quentin feels at all sorry about that and that he knows what he did wrong, because I don't get that sense at all. I don't feel like Quentin has any kind of concept of how fucked up that is. And I need them both to be a little bit more informed, I guess, both him and Alice. So he's talking to Penny, and he tells Penny, dude, you've been gone for 6 weeks. And Penny says, what are you talking about? 6 hours. And Quentin looks at him and is like, no, dude, not at all. And that really, more than anything, is what gets Penny a little bit panicked, because 6 weeks, like a week per hour, that is insane. That is a huge amount of time. Like, that is certainly enough to make me panic, and Penny just, I don't know. It's interesting that as a traveler, the whole thing is supposed to be that he's able to go in between worlds, but I'm wondering if he would ever be able to navigate this particular place despite the moon and everything being different, or if because it's not any particular place and it's between, the whole thing is that he can't navigate it, So anyway, the Fountains all go to different worlds. The one time I need you to know this Comic-Con shit, and he says, I'm lost. There's 3 moons here, Quentin. My internal compass is having a grand mal seizure. And he says, I can't aim to come back. If I try to travel back, I could end up dead. I need your help. And this is when they realize they're going to have to find somebody who's really good at traveling to either go there and lead him back, or who knows what. And we find out later that there is a way to make the fountain light up so that they could, make so that he can aim straight for the light it's basically a spotlight head, like blasting straight up into the sky. But, we'll get there. So they go and they talk because they're trying to find somebody else who is a traveler. And nobody really knows of anybody except Alice does. And she's been sort of sitting on it because it's somebody that is connected to her mother, and she really would rather not have to use this connection if she doesn't absolutely have to. Which once we meet her mother, it becomes a lot clearer. I really love this because there are so many instances where we have like somebody who has secret connections to somebody, or who has like, you know, someone in their back pocket that they haven't wanted to call on because of some old grudge or debt or something like that. That's, as much as it makes sense in the story, you don't have that sort of visceral reaction to why they wouldn't want to use this if they had to. And with Alice's mom, that sense of why she wouldn't want to take advantage of this is so much more understandable. I mean, there is something about having it be family and having it be her mother specifically who is not interested in being a parent, which is very apparent. Lol. It makes it so much more like emotionally upsetting to me. We'll get there in a second. The first thing that they do is they go and talk to Margo and Elliot. And Elliot has been basically self-medicating. He is fucked up. I was wondering about what was going to happen, you know, because he wound up having to kill the man that he had like fallen in love with overnight. And Margo gets very worried about him realizing just how high and fucked up he is, and tells him that she is going to take him to the infirmary. He says that he had a pink, a green, and a tab of something called chocolate sunshine. And as he's sitting there, a glass explodes. And of course, everybody assumes that he's the one who did that with magic that's like not quite under control because he is in this state with the drugs. But we wind up finding out when Margo takes him to the infirmary that he is fine, but Margo is not. And I love this like treatment of the unprotected rituals, because they're acting like this is sex. Like she had unprotected sex and contracted some sort of STD. But it's a ritual, and it was some dude who was a complete creep, wanted to be in a relationship with Margo, and decided to take some of her life force to make a golem, a doll version of her. Which I cannot tell you guys, if this were possible, how many golems of women would be running around. Like Quentin would have one of Julia. I really believe that if things had gone slightly different with Quentin, and he had learned how to make a golem of Julia earlier on, that he would have been the type to do something like this. I really believe that. This is just so upsetting because it really reminds me of the season with Warren in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And, you know, trying to, if you can't absolutely control women, you make like versions of women that you can. And how utterly upsetting that is. You know, it's just wanting to not giving a shit about the consent of the person and wanting what you want, regardless of what they want, is so fucking fundamentally horrifying to me. And it always blows my mind when you meet people that have this sort of mindset, that they just really are that selfish and that self-centered and that obsessive as well. They're really like, this dude that does this to her, he really needs some counseling. Straight up. He needs to talk to somebody because he's got some issues. But we don't have that revelation until a little bit later. What winds up happening, I'll just sort of like get through that because it's not a hugely involved storyline. But when she finally like finds this dude, she decides to take the golem and not destroy it, because she thinks that there might be something that they can do with this version of Margo eventually that, could be helpful, that could be useful. And I don't disagree, but also having another version of me is really, really creepy. I appreciate that she notices how attractive she is because she's able to look at herself walking around. I wish so much that I had been able, while I was in great shape, to appreciate how I looked. And I love that Margo appreciates that about herself. Girl, enjoy that shit. You really need to enjoy it because it doesn't last forever. And bless you. So we have her, and she's sitting next to Elliot on the couch at one point. And we find out later that this is golem Margo and not real Margo. But he doesn't know that at this point. And he tells her, he says, first of all, can we really talk? And he's shaking and flipping out a little bit. And he says, I think Professor Lipson could have been wrong about me. I think something might really be broken. And Margo comes and sits next to him and tries to kiss him. And Elliot is like, what the fuck? And backs away from her. And then regular Margo comes in and he realizes that he was trying to be vulnerable and open with the golem version of Margo. And guys, can I tell you how heartbreaking this was for me? I am very much like Elliot in some ways where I don't like to show weakness. I will show how I feel to people if it's, disdainful, if it's enthusiasm, if it's something safe and keeping people at a distance. I will show those sorts of feelings pretty easily. But in terms of showing real vulnerability, it's not something that I do with people. And I know that sort of sounds untrue when you listen to my podcast. And I get real, and I will occasionally start crying over something. But that is all done in a context which I have complete control over, right? I am not sitting talking to a friend who can talk back, who is not usually anyway, or in a particular setting that I can really dig into this. It's often a sort of side tangent conversation that I will touch on and move away from. And I will be doing it in a context of performance still, I'm trying to be honest, but there is still a distance there in knowing that there will be lots of strangers listening to this. And it's a different thing when you are sitting next to somebody in private on a couch, somebody that you know well, that you rely on in a lot of ways, but with whom you have a sort of surface relationship a lot of the time. And you are about to try and do something more than that, even though you are great friends and you know that they're not going to reject you because of it. It's still difficult to do because you have a fear that maybe they won't be able to handle it, So this moment where he tries so hard to open himself up and really be honest with her, and then it turns out it's not even her. And I really like the way this is done, because it's not that Margo fucked up and reacted in such a way that made him pull back. It's that this wasn't even Margo. This wasn't Margo's fault that this went this way. It's just a misunderstanding, but it is completely understandable that the moment passed and Elliot pulls back and doesn't take another opportunity to try and talk to her about this, because it's clear that he got scared off. Doing this in the first place was really difficult for him. He wasn't 100% sure, and because of how it all went down, it just doesn't really feel like the right time when she walks back into the room. And he is looking at her and she can tell that something's wrong. She says, "What were you two talking about?" And he just says nothing. And then he holds out a box of candies and he says, "I got these for you, bitch." And she says, "Thanks, bitch." And it's a really it's a moment of them trying to be friends, but not really, again, opening up to each other. I want them so much to take it to another level. And I don't know how Margo would react if he explained to her. I don't know how much of what happened she even knows about. I assume she has to know about most of it. Otherwise, the way he's acting would feel a lot more out of character and she would be much more worried. But I feel like she should be more worried, even if she knows. I don't know. So that's sort of the end of things with the two of them. So I'm going to really quickly hit on what was going on with Julia. Julia, they're going to be having, her and Richard are going to be having a get-together with a bunch of the people from the online chat room group that they are involved with. And she is going to be hosting, and she has been so wrapped up in everything that she's doing that she lost track of what day it was and didn't realize that they were coming that day. I think she thought it was the next day. So he tells her that you and Asmodeus are going to be having to level up before you can participate in the bigger project with us. We find out, because everybody's been going by usernames, that Asmodeus is Katie. And I have to admit here, now, don't get me wrong, I am not at all interested in a long ongoing feud between Katie and Julia. I don't want this to be drawn out. However, when Julia says, I am not responsible for your mother's death. I'm sorry that you and your mom had a shitty relationship. And not a day goes by where I don't feel terrible about what happened to her. But I didn't cause it. I only wish that I could have stopped it, and I'm trying to make up for my past just like you. Okay. I admire her saying this. I don't think even that she's wrong. I don't want to say Julia is responsible for her death, because she's not. But I do have to say that they took a risk that was Julia's suggestion to take, even after Katie's mother warned her how incredibly vicious Marina could be. After everybody warned her. And she only did this because she wanted some new spells. And I can't help but feel like she's trying to distance herself more than she really deserves to do. And I understand in this moment, in front of Katie, that this is kind of how she needs to handle this for the sake of peace between them at this moment. But it felt to me a little bit like she had talked herself out of any responsibility. And I don't feel like that's fair either. But it does lead to Katie sort of seeming to calm down and them being able to have a study session that seems to lead to them actually leveling up. So in that sense, I'm glad that they were able to sort of, I don't know. I want them to move on, but I also want to feel like Julia really understands that this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made the suggestion that you made. That you didn't cause her death, but your greediness led to her death. I don't know. I have a really tough relationship with the concepts of forgiveness and moving on, because I always feel like people say, well, you don't forgive for the other person. You forgive for yourself. And that's all grand, but I don't have the ability to like forgive a person that I feel is about to go and make the same mistake again. And I can't watch this with her getting involved in a new crew the way that she is and really feel like she has made particular strides personally. I don't know that she has. Like, we haven't seen enough. So I just sort of have to trust that she has. I don't know. Jesse says it was definitely Julia's idea to take the cabinet, right? Yeah. So like, I don't know. I just felt weird about it. And I would not be surprised if it turns out later that Katie is definitely not over this at all. And we think that she and Julia have gotten past this and are friends. And it turns out that Katie hasn't let go of this one little bit. But, you know, I guess we'll see what happens. So they do this, these couple of series of like spells to see if they are going to be able to break out of this room that they're locked into, and join in with this other project. And the lights start flashing, and they're looking around trying to figure out exactly how, like, what's going on out there. But nobody is responding to them banging on the door being like, is everything cool? And when it happens again a little bit later, she looks up and notices that the clock on the wall has spun back. And they get like an order of pizza, and they are in the middle of like opening the box and eating it when she sees this. And when she looks down, the pizza is gone, and there is somebody knocking at the door again, and they're standing where they were a second ago. And it becomes very clear that something has happened to fuck with time. And when they go into the other room, because they hear everybody cheering, it becomes clear that this is the huge project that crew has been working on together, is trying to control time. And part of why is because Richard made a terrible mistake back when he was an addict. And he had a baby son whom he left in a hot car and forgot about. And the child died. And he is so fucking riddled with guilt about this that he is sort of spending all of his life and time to figuring out how he can undo that mistake. He says, we are the best magicians we know. Silver can literally fly to the moon, but Melanie is dying and we can't cure her. Bender's trying to stay off the ledge every day because his meds have stopped working. And this is when he tells them the story. I was a drug addict. I left my son in a hot car. And he was 8 months old. And his acting in that moment is really good. Somebody who is telling a story that he has had to tell multiple times, and he can get through it without crying, but it's a really close thing. And I think as we get older, all of us reach points in our lives where we have a story like this, that we try and tell it, and it gets a little easier every time, but it still fucking like rips at you, and you can't help but like have your eyes well up and your throat begin to close on you when you say the words. And Katie says only a fluke, natural-born time witch could do something like that. And he says, I've done the research, and I realized one day I was looking at it wrong. We don't have the energy, but it's not that we need to generate it, because somebody already has it. We just need them, and they can give us inexhaustible, unimaginable power. And when Katie's like, no, that's not possible, he says, yes, it is. The source. What people used to tap into every time that they wanted magic. Summon a god. So that is what his overall goal is. very, very modest. Listen, anybody who decides that they want to pull some shit this big, you got to get out of there. Okay? I totally get having curiosity about this. I get having curiosity on multiple levels. Can he do it? What does the ritual for summoning a god even look like? What is the god like? Would they respond? Will it work? All of that, I get that. But in the end, you are trying to get a god to give you something that is not natural and not something that human beings should wield. And I feel like that isn't going anywhere good. Like, that's just, either that god is going to give you what you want and you are going to fuck that shit up, or that god is not going to give you what you want, is going to resent being used in this way, and is going to fuck your life up some other way. I don't know which one it's going to be here, but I feel like it's one of those. So I don't love this, and I wish the two of them would back out of this deal. All right, so let's back up and go to what's going on with Alice and Quentin and her family. She has to go to her family home in order to talk to her mother about getting in touch with this traveler dude that her mother is into. And what they walk in on is a huge sex party in the Roman style. Everybody is literally like in togas and shit. And her, poor Alice, she asks Quentin to distract her father while she goes and talks to her mom. And the woman that plays her mother is really familiar. Her name is Stephanie Quinn. I have looked through some of her like IMDb and I can't figure out what it is that I know her from. I think it might be Sons of Anarchy. But she is just like and I couldn't figure it out. But she wants to be called Stephanie. She doesn't even want to be called Mom, which, I mean, that's one of those small things that says so much. She wants to leave behind that she is a mother because she wants to be her own person. And I can understand that in terms of if other people called you Alice's mother, like if that was the assigned sort of title, like for example, when you are being referred to as Mrs. Frank Bryce, you know, that kind of thing where you are just given your husband's identity basically because you married. I can understand rejecting that, but rejecting your own daughter calling you mom is you distancing yourself from your own child in a way that is very revealing, I think, about exactly how much emotional support she is prepared to offer this kid. And apparently she and Alice had a disagreement last time they encountered one another about 6 months ago, where she had said, because Alice is trying so hard right now, I don't see the point in talking about it. We don't agree on it and we're never going to. And her mother says, well, because you act like there's something wrong with me. And she says, no, I just think it's weird that you're not at all curious about what happened to Charlie. And her mother says, it's not going to bring him back, so I didn't want to know. And she says, which is a perfectly reasonable position in spite of how you judge me. I don't really understand how that's a reasonable position. If you don't know what happened to somebody, how do you know that you can't bring them back with the information about what happened to them? Like, that's just flat out nonsense. It's one thing to be like, oh, he's dead. We have his body and we buried him. And no matter what happened to cause his death, he's dead, whatever. They didn't have a body. He could have come back. You don't know what happened. That's the whole point. And so Alice lets it go here because obviously she kind of has to in order to get her mother to help. But in this moment, her mother is objectively wrong. And it is really frustrating how fucking she lords it over Alice. Like, admit that your mother is a human being because you act like you're the only one who has a right to feel. And Alice says, no, I don't. And her mother is just like, all right, you know what? We're done talking. And she gets out of the bath right in front of Alice and wraps herself up in a towel. I have to say, I really want this fucking bathtub very, very badly. But yeah, she is not interested in helping, very obviously. And it's not until a little bit later that Alice is able to sort of get control of herself and swallow her pride enough to have this conversation again and try again. And we see her and Quentin in her childhood bedroom, and she is talking to herself about how, or she's talking to him, but to herself mostly, about how when she's here and when she talks to her mother, she feels like she's being pulled into this old version of herself from when she was like 12 years old, which, you know, I think a lot of us feel that way when we are around family. I'm really lucky that I don't have siblings because I feel like that is really accentuated by being around siblings, especially. But it's something that still can happen. And it is a weird feeling. You know, you really think that you have left this person behind that you don't want to be anymore. And you haven't. They're still there. You have just put them on a shelf for a little while. I love the moment when Quentin points out the Garden State soundtrack and she says, hey, that was cool when it came out. That's pretty fun, that whole thing. So this whole thing, she talks about her father. My mom made him give me The Joy of Sex, the 70s version, because she thinks kids should know what pubic hair looks like. And Quentin is just sort of like amused by all of this. And he says something, I'm like really into damaged chicks. And she says, like, Julia. And I'm like, girl, this is not the fucking time. Okay. Stop it. And then she tells him about what was going on with her parents. She says, okay, so my mom knows this traveler from another world named Joe. Apparently, his actual name is impossible to pronounce. Anyway, it's kind of a touchy subject, and I think that it's best that when I talk to my mom, my dad's not around. He says, why? Is she sleeping with Joe? And she looks at him, and it's like, duh. And he says, and your dad doesn't know? They were just having a party, a sex party, when we showed up. And she says, I know it sounds ridiculous, but my parents are weird and possessive. And they just have to do everything together. When I was 10, my dad caught my mom having an affair and threatened to commit suicide. And basically tells him, he said he had to go extreme just to get her attention, which sounds psychotic, but it turns out he wasn't wrong. I think he would have done it if she hadn't come around. So essentially, this sex party this all kind of feels like her dad putting on a display in order to keep her mom happy. I'm not sure if that's entirely it, but I get the feeling that that's it. And yeah, it turns out when she goes and talks to her mother later on about everything, her mother is like, oh yeah, I love Joe. Your father loves Joe too. It's fine. And Alice is really taken off guard, and it's just like, I really thought that you weren't going to want to talk. Wait, really? I thought Dad would be mad about this and that you would be keeping it all a secret. It is a weird reaction, and Alice being puzzled. I also am. She's like, Alice, you make me sound so melodramatic. Fine. Yes, sure. At first, Your father was a touch sensitive, but then he figured out that Joe could work for both of us, so now he's our third in a polyamorous triad sense. And apparently, she says Joe's genitals are adaptable. He's like a Swiss Army knife, good for every occasion. Which I'm just like, that's fucking handy. How great would that be? Just to be able to switch in and out of whatever you need at the time. That's genius. So, that makes sense to me. So Alice tells her, I need Joe's help. We need to figure out how we can do this ritual. Joe shows up and he tells them that this is sex magic that will require the two of them to come at the same time. And Quentin and Alice have very different reactions to this news. Quentin thinks that this is going to be no problem, and Alice, for her part, is like, oh, well. And Quentin gets very worried and self-conscious about the fact that he thought he was making Alice come all the time, and he wasn't. Now, here's the thing that I really love that they decided to address this, but because sex with women, unless you are also a woman, it's really difficult to know how to, every woman is so different. Our bodies are, first of all, just built differently. And then what we like is different. Men, it's pretty standard. What a guy is going to go for, even if mentally, there are different things that turn certain guys on, sure. But in terms of the anatomy, it's kind of easy to figure out. Women, it varies so much. And Quentin doesn't have a ton of experience. And he also isn't real good at reading her body language. And she feels self-conscious asking him for what she wants. And it's I love that they went through this as a couple, but I kind of hated that then when they start having sex and she tells him what she wants, she comes immediately. Guys, they've been making out for maybe 20 seconds and she turns over and he apparently enters her and she starts coming that second. Which this sort of depiction of it, of sex with women, makes me so upset. Cis women, I should say, actually, specifically. It really bums me out that we cannot, in our depictions of cis women and their, experience with sex, we can't seem to get away from women orgasming immediately. It's just, even in this whole episode where that's an issue for them, it still takes fucking time, and a lot of time usually, and that's part of what men don't have the patience, and that's why so many women complain about sex with men, because it's just, men are very easy and they want it to be as easy for us as it is for them, and they don't understand that it's not, and they don't have the patience to invest the time that it would take. And this sort of depiction of how immediately it works out just, it frustrated me so much, because they were really taking on a topic that's true and a problem for plenty of couples, but then they made the solution so quick and easy that I was just come on. But it does wind up working once they are able to connect in this way. And it makes the fountain light up, and Penny is able to get back, except she's transported back directly into the fucking room where the two of them are in the middle of having sex. Poor Penny. He is just not ever going to get a break. And I have skipped over his interaction with the librarian, the great repository of knowledge, but I don't have a ton of time to get into this. I just really he's asking who the people who are trying to kill him are. She says the locals used to work for us in a custodial function, but labor relations have become somewhat strained of late. We had to ban them from the libraries. They've been thoroughly cursed, so they can't use any of the fountains, but that hasn't stopped them from finding other employment, some with a particularly nasty entity. And when he says the beast, she says he has many names. So that might be why they wanted the button, to try and give it back to the beast. Which, that would be, I'm interested in why. Does the beast want it because the button would make it easier for him to go back to our world? Or if it's just that he doesn't like us having a doorway to the Neitherlands, you know? So anyway, this interaction, it's very clear that he has met her before and he feels weird about it. Because she remembers him and he does not remember her. And there are books for each person's life in the on the shelves, and he comes across his, and she tells him most people who read their own books find that they don't like the main character and they don't like the ending. So I really enjoyed that. And she makes some photocopies of a book for him because he has wanted, let's see, here it is. Wait, Martin? That's one of the Fillory kids. Oh, that's right. And she agrees to photocopy pages. And that, because she has seen that if they actually tried to, if he tried to take the book from her, he would wind out ripping pages out. So she decides to get ahead of that and just photocopy it and give him the photocopies. It's not clear to me when he comes back to the room that Quentin and Alice are in, if he has those photocopied pages on him still. But I'd be very excited to see whether or not he does, because even if he doesn't, he might have had a chance to read them before he got out, so who knows. But yeah, so I think that's about everything because I'm running out of time. But, Ashley says that Alice's mom was in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie and she played April. I did see that. I don't remember that at all. I don't think that's where I know her from because my picturing her in my head, she's older, but maybe. And Jessie says, I love her line about not reading your own book. Yeah, I wouldn't want to read. Are you kidding me? No, thank you. I don't like that at all. I would definitely not be interested. I'll read other people's books. I would definitely do that, but not my own. All right, guys. Well, I have to wrap this up, but thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again to Nicole for commissioning this. I hope you're enjoying the coverage, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.